Good evening. We are ready to start. Sierra, why don't you check and see if it's on the internet? You can maybe text her. I'm not the computer guy. I'm getting better, but I'm not that guy yet. When I have questions, I always go to Tommy. See? Yeah. All right, very good. Well, Tommy, could you come lead a prayer? Would that be all right? Yes. Okay, go ahead. That's how we'll begin with a prayer then.
Thank you, dear God in heaven, for this day that you raised us into and joining us with a heart. Father, thank you for this privilege we have together here this evening to engage in this Bible study. Pray that we'll leave here knowing more about you than we did when we came, more about how you want us to live. Pray that you be with those sick amongst the number. Thank you for some healing that you've done. We're thankful for Jim Ambrose and the healing that he's had. We pray that you'll continue to heal him and help him. And pray that you be with Jessica and continue to help her. Help us through this study. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.
Amen.
So, yes, you heard Tommy mention Jim Ambrose in the prayer. Went and seen him today, and man, he looks good. Yeah, his face, all the color is in his face. The last time I saw him, he didn't look that good. So he's had a lot of trouble sleeping, and so he was diagnosed with sleep apnea. They gave you what they give you to take care of that. He's sleeping well, and they of course found where he was bleeding and losing blood, and he's a different man. So we were so happy to see him in that shape today. So very good. All right, if you have your Bibles, you can turn them to Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. So in verse 14, and as he passed by, he saw Levi the son of Alphaeus sitting at the receipt of custom, and said unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. So we looked at a little bit last week at Matthew, and we discussed how taxes were gathered. There was some question as to maybe some things that I said. You could pay. By the way, why didn't they want money for taxes? Does anybody know? Mark 2, what did I say? Folks, I may not be tip-top shape tonight. I have no idea what's wrong with me today. You know what? I just thought, Janie, it might be the fumes in that car. Never thought that. Maybe that's what it was. I don't think it's the fumes. That thing doesn't run on gasoline. That old car we used, we call it the Gospel Civic, and we go visit people. That thing runs solely on prayers. So, but Sierra came into my room at about 6:23 and said, "Don't you have something tonight?" And I had laid down, and I don't know what was wrong with me. Wasn't a headache. I just couldn't hardly stand or keep my eyes open. So, but I haven't been sleeping well for about a month. This sciatic nerve. Yeah, yeah. Uh, and I got a wedding coming up. So, but I'll tell you, I've had the sciatic nerve, but it's never been this way. It's never lasted so long. I used to get it, and then I'd just climb up that ladder about 100 times, and that seemed to help it a little bit. But I haven't been climbing up no ladders. So you could give money for taxes, but does anyone realize or know why money was not really the most desirable way of paying taxes? Anybody have any idea? Well, they would have had money to some extent, but yeah, many people were poor. Yeah, I was reading, and what he is saying, for those of you who are listening to the internet, you could probably hear Marley back there. He wants to answer. I don't know what he's thinking. When he talks, he just looks like he's having a full conversation with you, and you wonder, what in the world is he asking? But I think I know. Probably, do you have any food on you right now? Yes. But when I was in Pennsylvania, my family, all of the Hetrick. By the way, how many Joshua Hetricks are in West Virginia?
They said you couldn't believe how many of them there is now.
Yeah. Well, there are so many. Tommy went to the tax office and asked about me. There are a whole lot of. It's a long story. Anyway, there are a whole bunch of Josh Hetricks. Yeah, but there's only one Josh man. You guys remember that. But all my family is from Jefferson County, Pennsylvania. And the county seat of Jefferson County, Pennsylvania is Punxsutawney. And so you all know Punxsutawney because of that groundhog. By the way, there are two groundhogs. They are both kept in the Punxsutawney County Library. There's a big glass display, and you could see them in there. But there's two for obvious reasons. If one wakes up and doesn't see his shadow, well, but if you wake up and don't see a groundhog, there'd be a problem, right? So while I was there, I was going through my family history. This was years ago. I had lived in Pennsylvania, but this wasn't even during that time. I just drove up one day and wanted to check it out. And I was looking at how people were paid back then. So the first teacher in Jefferson County, the first one-room schoolhouse teacher, can you guess what he was paid with for the whole year? Eggs? That's a good guess. Maple syrup. He got a few barrels of maple syrup. And I guess in Pennsylvania at that time, maple syrup was like gold. Okay? But still is, especially good stuff. But if you lived during this time, money was not the preferred way to pay taxes to the Roman government. Have you thought of it yet? Because of the exchange rate. Well, salt would be good. But the exchange rate is why they wanted it in products. Once you received the product, you could go down to the market and sell at whatever market price there was for whatever produce or whatever it is that you dealt with. So like today, when I went to Israel in 1995, it was 3 shekels to each dollar. Okay? And so their currency was shekels. It was 3 shekels to each dollar. And so if you are paying with shekels or the Galilean shekel, that's not worth as much as, whatever Roman denarii or whatever currency they had. And so they really did like to receive products over money. Did somebody have a hand up? Yes, go on.
Same thing happened in Mogadishu when they had that war going on there. The money from Mogadishu couldn't be used for anything.
Yes. Roddy mentioned a personal situation when he was in Mogadishu where money was worth nothing because of an ongoing war. We run into this, by the way, in the New Testament when Jesus is casting out the money changers. What is a money changer? Well, it's exactly what we're talking about. And I believe that the Syrian shekel was the only one that could be used in the temple. And so the exchange rate, of course, was designed where exorbitant rates could be made. And, of course, it seems as if they might just set it wherever they want to set it. And Jesus then overturned those tables. And the money changers, of course. By the way, he must have had the support of the people. You ever thought about that? Nobody did anything. I wonder how high the exchange rate was. Must have been a ripoff, Hugh. You're exactly right. Because nobody, and by the way, what time of the year was this? This was the Passover. And Josephus tells us that there were 250,000 men in 250,000 lambs slain there in the first century. So if they all bring a lamb, and if a man comes and he brings his wife and his family, 250, if you double it with just man and woman, you got 500,000. And if he brings some kids, you're close to 1 million people. Every spare room in Jerusalem is used up. So much so that when Jesus was going to have his Passover meal, you remember what the disciples were worried about? Where are we going to have it? And Jesus says, go in there and there'll be a man with a water pot and you follow him. By the way, why didn't Jesus tell them? What was with all the cloak and dagger? He was just going to be meeting with his apostles. I think you're exactly right, Tommy. He knew that Judas was going to rat him out, as Tommy says, and it wouldn't be until the evening. Notice he doesn't even tell Judas the place he's going, but he must have retired there many nights to pray, and Judas knew his custom. But yes, he had certain things to tell his disciples, and one of them was to explain that this meal would be important in the establishment of the church, the meal of which we call communion. So yes, money changers. So taxes then, many times, and this is not unusual. In the Old Testament, when you gave to the Lord, you gave a tenth right off the top. That phrase, off the top, is an ancient phrase. And if you had a stack or a big haystack, Laura's got a few meals that she likes, and one of the meals she makes is called haystacks. And it's some kind of taco thing. And of course, it's one of the best things I've ever ate, right? Especially if she's listening. But at the top of that haystack, and Abraham did this with Melchizedek. He gave him right off the top. So if you have a top of a haystack, literally that's what you did. You took the top of it and knocked it off. Now, that doesn't mean you just went up there and thought, well, I think that looks like 10%. There are mathematical ways to figure produce. Down at the farm my dad grew up on, we had a neighbor. He'd put that corn in that gravity wagon, and he'd run that 2x4 across the top, and he could just about tell you how much was in there, right down to the ounce. It was amazing. And so these folks knew what they were doing. And so right off the top, and that became a practice amongst the early Jews whenever they would sacrifice to God. All right, any questions on that? I felt like last week maybe I wasn't as thorough in my explanation as I should have been. I've probably been too thorough at this point. You guys all got it? Okay. Well then, and they knew what you got. It's like today, you can't get away from paying taxes. I mean, you make certain money if you... I quit this a long time ago, this idea of trying to worry about it. If I get paid anything, I just turn it in, which I think is the Christian thing to do anyway. If you got to render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, right? As unorganized as I am, I imagine there are times that I've forgot, but for the most part, other than the excuse of stupidity, I think I've done my best at it. But we were talking today about taxes in West Virginia. You don't have any of those, right? So, all right, Levi then. Levi, of course, is the one that we know of as Matthew. He sits in the place of the toll or the taxes. He had a toll house. I often thought it was funny that someone had come up with this idea that little, what are they? Those little guys that help Santa. There's these little elves that live in a toll house that happens to be a tree. Am I right on that? Keeblers. Well, which one is Toll House? Nestle. Well, no wonder it's so odd. A Pringle tree. Oh, yes. Yeah. Don't get me off subject. I got a lot of things right now that I'm. When you talk about bizarre West Virginians, I got a lot of stories. So, yes. So toll houses. If you go on Old 40, you'll still see a few of the toll houses that exist there, and I don't know that it was much different. But many times they were in places where there were markets. The toll houses on Old 40 were to actually pay for the road. So he says then that you have this one Levi, and Levi, of course, is reminiscent of the Old Testament tribe of Levi. We know him as Matthew. That phrase or that word is pronounced differently sometimes in the New Testament. There are at least 2 Matthews that I know of in Jesus' genealogy, which to me is very interesting also. Verse 15, it came to pass that as Jesus sat at meat in his house, many publicans and sinners sat also together with Jesus and his disciples. For there were many, and they followed him. And so then here there were certain people that sat with Jesus. Jesus ate with sinners. There's no doubt about that. Some people have tried to take this as and expound on it in such ways to use it as a principle today. And I think sometimes we might go too far with our principle. To eat with sinners is one thing. To mingle with sinners in such a way that you condone their lifestyle is altogether another. What I mean by that is someone says, well, we ought to be in the bars preaching the gospel. Have you ever heard that? What do you think? I know of a ministry that there is a lady who used to be what we would call a stripper, and she goes into these joints, and she has brought many of these ladies to Christ, and her ministry is just that. And I've often wondered, well, that's not too bad, but there's no way you'd catch me going into the bar and preaching. I have been in bars at awkward times. I grew up playing bluegrass music, and just as a little kid, I'd go in there. I was playing the big bass fiddle. I had a stool that I had to stand on, and I wanted to play the bass fiddle because I saw this old footage of Elvis, and his bass player would get that thing spinning real big and stuff, and would jump on it, and I had all these little tricks on it. But they would hire us in these bars. I don't even think it was legal for me to be in there, but I guess back then they didn't care. I never had a bad experience in the bar as a kid. I had all the Coca-Cola and pickled eggs and peanuts that I wanted to eat. No problem. But it was awkward. There were times when the band that I was playing with, and again, I wasn't a member of the church, I didn't have a full understanding of the church. And we would go in there, and they would, in the middle of all these hard bluegrass songs, they'd play some old gospel tune. And it was ironic because at a young age, I realized something. When they would play that, you'd hear a pin drop. And the bartender would say, play something fast, man, like that. Well, that's not something that people who are in that place want to hear. They go there to hide. Our wrestling coach used to take us to a bar, again, Bellsville. I don't know if these kind of things are legal, but every time we'd win a match, he'd take us down to the local bar there, and that's where we'd eat. And when you get in there, something I noticed immediately was all the windows were black, and everything was dark. And just as a little boy, I remember thinking, what are they trying to hide? Well, now, of course, as I'm older, I know what they're trying to hide. As I got older, my friend and I, who were Christians, were working with another man who was really struggling with his sin, and he was an alcoholic. There's no doubt about it. And sometimes we'd be out. We like to do a lot of fishing. We're real wild guys, so we'd be catfishing out there, and we'd come in there about 1 o'clock in the morning through town, because we like to go. The only place open was a truck stop, so we go there and eat, and then we come back through town, and we'd see his car. And I know my Fred wouldn't say a word. He'd just pull over, and he'd go in there. About 5 minutes later, he was dragging our other friend out, who just couldn't seem to beat it. I don't think there was anything wrong with my friend going in there and getting him out. Now, I've got one more example to use. Years ago, I used to park at the Malaga Bar and Grill. It had the biggest parking lot around, and if you've been to Malaga, there's nothing there. And so that parking lot is the only one you'd use, and I would carpool to go to work. I went to church one night, and the ladies at Jerusalem were looking at me and said, "We're going to have to do something about this." And I said, "Do something about what?" I had no idea what they're talking about. I started thinking, what did I do and what did they know, right? And here, finally, I understood what they were talking about. They didn't want my car sitting there because I was their preacher. And, of course, I don't know why, but everybody knew my car. You guys will be happy to know that my truck, it passed inspection this week. But my car always stands out like a sore thumb. You just can't miss it. I think I had a Ford Escort at that time. It was about 5 different colors. One of them was rust. So I think they had a point. So I didn't park there anymore. I parked right across the road. And they were happy with that. But yes, these questions come up all the time. What is our responsibility to the sinner? We know that Lot, did he make much of a difference in the city that he lived in when he lived in Sodom? Doesn't seem like he made any difference with the community. The truth is, he failed his own family. I think sometimes we are too worried about how we look amongst the world. We keep one foot in the world and one foot in heaven. And the fact of the matter is, we ought to stay in heaven as much as we can and be an example to the world. Now, this isn't always easy. That's why we're called to evangelize. So, eating with sinners. Was Jesus just doing it to garner some kind of attention that would have been scandalous or controversial? One might say, or borrow a phrase from the day, someone say, well, he was having a conversation that had to be, or that was needed. Do you hear that today? A lot of people say, this is a conversation that needs to be had. Go ahead.
That's a dumb question, but sinners, we're all sinners, but I assume these were people that weren't, I don't understand that.
Well, that is, to some extent, a little hard to say. You must look at the context. Remember, a lot of times in the Gospels or in the Bible, sinners is a euphemism for harlots. I do not know that that's the case here, but generally when the word sinners is used, it is in the context of some kind of, in context with the sin of fornication. And so then, does anybody else have an idea about that?
No, it says that's what the Jews thought of people that did not accept the Mosaic law. They were all just worthless.
So that would be the idea of a Gentile. When I was over there, there was a word I kept hearing. It was the word goyim, or goy. And when they were talking about me, at first I thought they were saying boy, but they were saying goy. The word goy means Gentile. I thought that was very bizarre, that it was 1995, and I was being referred to as a Gentile. Something I had never felt guilty of in my entire life. There are some phrases that are aimed at making you feel guilty. Today, in a broader cultural sense, there are words that are used that can destroy somebody, especially somebody who's in the public eye. You could be cursed at, you can be called a lot of derogatory names, And they may feel bad, but there is one that is thrown around now that makes you feel guilty. And that is the word if someone calls you racist. Have you ever thought about that? The implication of such a word? I mean, you can call me an old bum. You can, talk about anybody that I care for. You can even kick my dog, but don't say anything bad about my truck, right? But I don't feel guilty about them because you are the one that has a problem. Would you call me that? But today there is this word, and if you have any conversation, if you will, on the subject of race, you could be called a racist, and you actually feel guilty for being called that. Isn't that bizarre? But it's just an observation that I had. But yes, sinners. What verse is it? Verse 15. So then sinners sat also together with Jesus. Probably the worst one amongst the whole bunch was the tax collector, as far as how people felt concerning him. But there are a few other groups there. There is, of course, the publicans. And what is the publican? There's the one that collects the Roman revenues. And so who is that aimed at in this particular verse? No doubt Levi. It may be the case that Levi had friends. And Jesus would have sat with them on that occasion. Yeah, publicans. But, generalization. Do you ever generalize? I always tell my kids they'll hold things against me, and usually if they got something to say to me, it begins with this phrase: "You always." Right? I might do something they don't like one time, but it becomes "you always" very quickly, and that seems to be the way the Pharisees and those opponents of Christ would speak. He may not have been with any more tax collectors other than Matthew at this point. But, of course, the more people you attach, the harder the indictment becomes. And so then here, he eats with publicans and sinners. He sat also together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. It may be the case, surely, that this is Gentiles. We aren't necessarily made privy to that this early in his well, this would be, of course, a case where that could be feasible. Who would be the friends of Levi, or who would be Matthew's friends? Perhaps those who are of the same employment, and probably Gentiles. Who are the people he deals with the most? Romans, right? And so he would have had dealings with Romans, and consequently, these are the people that he would have known. These are the people he would have felt safe around. So, yes. Any other questions on that? Well, they sat together with Jesus and his disciples. I've often wondered what his disciples must have thought. His disciples in this book have certain issues. A certain religion that has elders who are in their 20s, who wear fine pants and white shirts. I won't mention who they are, but if you think about it, it won't take you long. They were talking to me one day about their apostle, and I said, "Can your apostles be wrong?" And of course, these young men who would stand up for their apostle would say, "No, not at all." And I said, "Has any apostle ever been wrong?" Now, the reason they were saying that is because I think they knew what I was going to go at. This idea of their original apostle who felt that polygamy was just fine, and then all of a sudden one day changes. Well, he didn't. His followers would change their mind on it a few years later to become part of a statehood. Isn't it interesting sometimes the things that people in the world would do when it comes to politics and money? But they said, no, he can't be wrong. I said, what if your apostle was a bigot? Or that terrible word, a racist? Could he be that? No, he couldn't. And there are numerous times in the New Testament where we find that the apostles were wrong in their attitudes toward other people. In this very book, it doesn't take long before you find what their attitude is concerning Gentiles. If you go over to chapter 6, look at verse 45. And straightway, so that's chapter 6 of the book of Mark, verse 45. And straightway he constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida, while he sent away the people. I want to look at verse 36. Send them away, that they may go into the country round about and unto the villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. Now these are Jewish people who, of course, have been following Jesus, and their answer is to send them away. The reason I wanted to read that is because you see that after they are fed, Jesus sends them away. And I want you to look here at another place where where's it at? This is what happens when you rely on having your own Bible here. It's the Syrophoenician woman. What chapter is that in? Yeah, that's what I thought, right there. Chapter 7. Okay. All right. So this is their attitude as far as these people who have been fed. And, oh, yes. So look over in Matthew chapter 14, verse 15. Sorry about that. Matthew 14 and verse 15. And when it was evening, his disciples came unto him, saying, This is the desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away. Then if you go over to chapter 15, the Syrophoenician woman comes. And here, this is a Gentile. So here is Jesus literally eating with sinners, if you will. And he answered her not a word, and his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. You know what that ought to be translated in English? When I was over there, one of the words I learned very quickly was the word sheket. Can you guess what sheket means? No, don't guess. Every morning this guy would get up and he had a loud dog. And I would hear him yelling, Sheket! What was he saying? Shut up! And so what are these disciples saying to Jesus here about this Syrophoenician woman, or this Gentile woman, or this sinner? Send her away, Lord. She won't shut up. She won't leave us alone. And so you get kind of a picture. Sorry about that. I got the harmonies messed up here in our Gospels, but you sort of get a picture of their view. And so back to the illustration of the apostle. Can he be wrong? Yes, he can. You remember it would be Peter who would act a different way when he ate with the Gentiles as opposed to his own brethren as Jews. And the Bible says Paul rebuked him to his face. Now you think about that. I'm obviously talking about the Mormons. And those boys were doing pretty good. And I got them to that point. And you could tell they were really thinking, well, if the first apostles could be wrong, maybe our apostle could be wrong. So they brought along one of their priests. I didn't even know that existed. And he came into my house, and I don't see Jaws, and she might remember this, but when he got there, we were setting the table, and I poured some drinks and things for them to have, and these two young elders were sitting here to my right. This priest was sitting to my left, and he was going to talk to me. I don't know if he wanted to set me straight or what, but he was talking, and he mentioned God, and I said, I don't want to talk about God. I want to talk about God's Father, because wait a second. I want to talk about God's grandfather. Well, how far can I go back? How many greats can I go to? And he wanted to go back to Jehovah. I said, I don't want nothing to do with a conversation about Jehovah. If he has a father and his father before him and his father before him, well, the first would be the greatest, right? So who is the first? That's who I want to talk to. That's who I'll follow. And I just kept going and going. And he started to say, I've often wondered about that myself. This priest and these boys are looking at each other because they thought they had brought their champion. And I had read the Book of Mormon in one night. It reads like a comic book. I do not mean to be mean, but get a copy. Watch where you order it, or people will come and want to talk about it, which I suppose would be fine. But get a copy. It took me one night to read the thing. And they have Jesus being born in Jerusalem, and they have all these crazy things. The folks came over here to this country in a boat shaped like a football. I also read the Covenants. There are other books they have. But here they come over to America in a boat shaped like a football with a hole in it. They keep having to bail the water out of the football with a hole in it. And there's all these things. And I'm prepared, but I just start with that one. Tell me the most superior God, because that's the one that I want to obey. And before long, he starts to cry like it was almost pitiful. And he gets up and walks out. Now, they came from like 6 miles away, and these boys are left at my table. And I said, what a situation we find ourselves in. Well, I say, boys, would you like a ride home? And they go, no, we got it. We're fine. And I told them, I said, boys, you have seen the fallacy of this doctrine. And you don't have to follow it. You can repent right here tonight and be saved. And they just looked at each other and said, they were very nice. I think we'd like to leave now. Well, let me give you a ride. No, we like to walk. It's like, it's 6 miles. We'll be fine. But, yes, these apostles were not perfect people. Only Jesus was. And so it is that even the apostles lived in a world that was race-oriented. Does it sound like a world that you know anything about today? Very pertinent, isn't it? And so then, back to Mark, verse 16. And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eat with the publicans and sinners, they said unto his disciples, how is it that he eateth and drinketh with publicans and sinners? Notice they don't come and ask Jesus. They ask his disciples. And later on, when they cannot destroy him through his disciples, they will accuse his disciples. Why do your disciples eat with unclean hands or unwashed hands? Why do your disciples pick grain on the Sabbath? And so you see a shift in the accusations. I had a friend, he was a preacher. Matter of fact, he was a Baptist preacher, and he liked to really tease me. And sometimes when I did something stupid, which was all the time, he would quote the Pharisees. And by that, I mean he would assume himself as a Pharisee, and he would quote them. If you ever get a chance, there is a little Bible that just simply quotes the Pharisees. And sometimes when you hear it, you might ask somebody where that's at in the Bible, and they think maybe Jesus or somebody said it. But one of his favorites was, who are you who's altogether born in sin to instruct me on what to do? And, here are these Pharisees. That is how they argue. They cannot win an argument with Jesus, and so they practice what is called ad hominem. My kids know that phrase. I'd always tell them, I'm not going to engage in ad hominem with you right now. And so what is ad hominem? Well, that's Latin for, if I can't win an argument, I'll just tear the opponent down. By the way, this is why, if you watched any of the debates last time, this is why I think clear across the board, Republican and Democrat, there wasn't one of them that could argue their way out of a paper bag. I wasn't impressed with any of them. When they're down, the president now, the president we had before, every president I could think of, when they're down and out, what do? Well, right now they don't say much, but they have their folks who support them, and every argument you watch is ad hominem. They'll just tear the opponent down. Now, who learns anything from such an argument? I remember learning ad hominem very quickly. I have 5 minutes. When I was a little kid, I would say something, and they would say something mean, and I was very shy, and I didn't know what to say. And I remember I learned a comeback. It went like this: I know you are, but what am I? That was my first ad hominem argument that I can remember. I had nothing else. I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. There's an even better one. And as time went on, I learned how to argue such a way, and never did me any good. And so then here the Pharisees are great at such ad hominem arguments. Verse 17, when Jesus heard it, he said to them, they that are whole have no need of the physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Jesus did not come to be a shrine for the saints. He came to be a hospital for the sinner. And that's the way we ought to be. We ought to be the balm of Gilead. We ought to be healing in our words. And so again, as we mentioned Sunday morning, let us always strive to be sweeter. I don't think that song is sweeter as the day goes by. I looked at it this week. It's a song you led last time you were here, Scott. And it's just a phrase in it. It isn't the title. It's just at the end. And can anybody remember it yet? It's in the chorus about being sweeter. Do you remember it, Linda?
Well, I remember singing it.
Yes, I cannot remember the title. But yeah, why not be sweeter? I told Emmanuel Doherty one time, did I say that right? Yeah. I said, you can catch more flies with honey. You know what Emmanuel's response was? Who wants flies? Well, sometimes that's how we feel, isn't it? But sometimes we just need to be sweeter in the things we say and do. Being kind. The old adage, of course, is words hit harder than fist.
Is the phrase, I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And then we say that there's none righteous, no, not one.
Yes.
And I don't understand how some could be righteous and some could be sinners when we're all sinners.
Yes, and so he's pointing at the attitude. By the way, yes, and we call this self-righteousness. Jesus said, you're all whited sepulchres. Whited sepulchres, which meant they were all pretty on the outside and dead on the inside. He did, however, concede at times a certain amount of righteousness that the Pharisees had. You remember he said to his disciples, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, ye shall in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. And so there were things that the Pharisees had done that were very righteous. That verse, by the way, scares me, because when I look at the righteousness of the Pharisees, I know they fasted at least twice a week. The only time I break the fast numerous times a day. Okay? They would give to the poor. There were many honorable things that the Pharisees... By the way, if you lived during the time of Christ as a member of the Church of Christ, it's very possible you would have been a Pharisee. Did you find it? Which one is it? Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you.
Lay your gifts at his feet, ever strive to keep sweet.
Lay your gifts at his feet, ever strive to keep sweet. What's the title again? You all remember that, because I'll forget it. And so, yes, he's talking about a self-righteousness. We have a phrase that we use when someone is being self-righteous, or more, we say more righteous than thou, right? But if they are doing that, we might call them pharisaical. And so here Jesus is saying they think that they're righteous. He said, I didn't come to be a shrine for the saints or to call the righteous, but for the sinner. And Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. And by the way, not all Pharisees were lost. It's a very curious thing to me that we're done, aren't we? It's a very curious thing to me that Paul never stopped calling himself a Pharisee. After he had become a Christian, you remember he said, I am a Pharisee of Pharisees. It seemed that he still aligned himself with that group. All right, any questions, comments, gripes, complaints, or criticisms? Thank you for being patient with me tonight. Like I say, it's been a rough day for some reason. Nothing? All right.